6 weeks ago, Victorians were told for their very own good they had to go to a stage 3 lockdown until the 20th of August. However, as we now know, that strategy didn't work. In fact, it failed. Victorians now find themselves in a stage 4 lockdown, and it's for another 6 weeks. And you've got to add to that, there are curfews now to deal with. We even need a work permit in order to leave home. Now these, if you think about it, are draconian restrictions, with Melburnians finding themselves virtually imprisoned in their own homes. It appears to me especially that the government has run out of ideas, and there is no end in sight to the current madness. This dilemma that Victorians are finding themselves in is not one of their own making. No, we've got to be clear about that. As each day passes, we are finding out it's more because of the bungling efforts of the Andrews government. Victoria's economy is going to take a fearful hit. It seems Melburnians are doomed to pay for these mistakes for a number of years to come. And I can't be any clearer than that. It's going to cost us an awful lot. This once great state of ours on Sunday was declared, wait for it, a state of disaster by Daniel Andrews. Now that's a disturbing comment. It's really hard to say. A state of disaster. The reputation of Australia's jewel in the crown has been seriously tarnished. We aren't teetering on the precipice of disaster. No. We're about to fall over the edge. As Victorians, in the past 8 weeks, we've witnessed the state spiral into a black hole, and it's one that we may be lost in for quite some time. That's just how dire Victoria's position is at the moment. We have overthought, it seems to me, everything, and we appear to be paralysed with fear. We don't know what's going on. We have a Premier under siege. He's unable to hold a line of strategic logic. He's a Premier reacting to unions with their fingers well in the pie, and they have no place to be there. There are advisors and ministers who have failed him through their collective ineptitude. And then, of course, there's the Chief Medical Officer who is simply not up to the job. And to highlight what I've just said, Brett Sutton's incompetence. Just think of this. He told us, and quite emphatically at the time, that face masks offered little or no protection, nor did they reduce the spread of contagion. Now, just a few weeks on, what are we being told? We're being told that they are absolutely critical in the fight against COVID-19. Now, this goes to the very heart of his ineptitude and the incompetence that I referred to a moment ago. Because when the COVID pandemic hit, face masks should have been made mandatory, but they weren't. The Premier has on his plate a bit of a kale pache, a stew, and it's one made from boiled cow or sheep parts. And that's what Victorians have been served. And I've got to tell you, it's not a very tasty dish. In fact, history will not be kind to Premier Andrews. As each week passes and we learn more and more about the incompetence of our bureaucracy and how it has led to all Victorians being imprisoned for a further 6 weeks, we're going to understand that Victorians have fallen victim to a collective stupidity. And we will have to endure a painful legacy because of it. We were told that COVID was an old person's disease. Yet, the state government failed to safeguard our most frail in our aged care unit because of a lack of foresight and clear mismanagement. And this is only part of the government's disastrous failures. The others, well, where do I start? They're all known to us. We came back too early. We relaxed the restrictions. Hey, that was a major bungle. Then, of course, there was the inept quarantining of overseas travellers. Another disaster, and this one with quite serious implications. No face mask policy, another strike. The Cedar Meats fiasco, a disaster. Allowing the Black Lives Matter and the 5G protest rally to take place. Really? What will we be thinking? And then add to that the sudden Housing Commission lockdown in Flemington and North Melbourne. What a disaster. There were more illogical allowances too. How about not telling people testing positive to COVID that no, they can't exercise? We didn't tell them that. Another strike. And through all these announcements and pronouncements, there has been a clear pattern. We have seen a litany of disasters emerge that the Premier simply must own. Yep. It's unacceptable for him to continue to blame Victorians for what has clearly been demonstrated now as his own government's bungling. Moving to this stage 4 lockdown is also wrong. It's wrong because it's going to create further social and economic unrest. It has been the hubris and ineptitude of the Premier and his ministers that has led us to this position that Victoria now finds itself in. Premier Andrews needs not only to sack Makakos, Wynne and Sutton, but he also needs to seek out the advice of experts, people who can properly steer a course that we can all follow. Professionals who can advise the Premier to find the courage to chart a new course of action, and a course of action that will be backed by a clear strategy. The people of Victoria are already paying a hefty price for the arrogance and incompetence that we've seen and has been on display from his ministers and his advisors. We all deserve much better. The very social fabric of Victoria is in jeopardy. We need proper advice, and that comes with knowledge and it comes with wisdom. We need Victoria to be steered safely through these current storms and definitely not led into the path of a cyclone, one that'll tear us apart. You know, people talk about the success of New Zealand, but Australia is not New Zealand. Nor did we adopt the same rapid strategy that the New Zealanders did. Yes, their Prime Minister Ardern was quick to move, which is why New Zealand contained COVID. They also managed to stay the course after making all their key decisions early. You see, they didn't waver. They believed in what they had and they went on with it. Our horse, well, it's bolted well and truly. We now have to look at a more measured approach on how to deal with the COVID pandemic, as opposed to a series of knee-jerk responses, not understanding the impact that they might have. The number of positive cases we're seeing daily is disturbing. The death toll, quite simply, is unacceptable. But rather than destroy the lives of more Victorians and make each of us pay for the abhorrent behaviour of those anti-maskers, as well as those who have failed to self-isolate, more thought should be given on just how to deal with them more effectively. More effectively than arresting them, we should be thinking about imprisoning them. Classify their failure to self-isolate as a serious breach, a criminal offence. Mr. Premier, how is it that you've failed your constituents so dismally? Can you tell us that? Every Victorian deserves to know. Victorians have lost faith in you and your government. Now, we've been asked at the Informer to start a petition. There are Victorians now who want to be out. They want you out of office and they want Victoria to be declared a territory and to have the federal government take over the reins. You see, COVID should never have been an issue in this country, as we were well warned by a host of nations overseas about what to expect and what we should do to protect Australia and Australians. But we actually live in a nation where each state has chosen to deploy its own strategy to deal with the pandemic. Incredible to think that we couldn't use a blanket strategy deployed by a federal government for the whole of the country. What we did, well, we have to sit back every day and watch our Premier in every state stand up and play state of origin. Really? It's 2020. This should be a done deal, a clear issue of addressing a national crisis, an issue where the Commonwealth can simply rule over the states for everyone's protection. What have we done instead? We've just offered everyone another dose of parochialism, Again, all because of a flawed constitution. The federal government has been handcuffed at a time of national crisis. Scott Morrison should have been able to simply instruct all the state premiers to follow a particular unified approach and response to COVID, which resided with himself and his health minister. But what have we seen instead? Well, we've seen each state initiate its own strategies with no uniformity and often confusing messaging and strategies that have made little or no sense. Now, it's not too long a bow to draw that Premier Andrews has blood on his hands. He will be seen as responsible for the economic destruction of Victoria and for driving the levels of suicide, domestic violence and mental health to unprecedented levels. He has plenty of explaining to do to all Victorians who are currently in despair, who are feeling anxious, desperate about what tomorrow will bring. Their families are grieving. There are hundreds of thousands who have lost their homes, lost their jobs. Many of their businesses are bankrupt or about to be. The rate of unemployment is continuing to climb, and even our students are feeling the uncertainty. This list just goes on and on and on, and we're all feeling it because of a host of unintended consequences that have been brought about by, as I mentioned from the very beginning, sheer ineptitude from our chosen leaders. There's only one thing that remains. A royal commission is imperative.